Today we're going to be talking about player advancement. So Mike, what is player advancement in terms of how a video game is built?
So player advancement is how when somebody starts playing a game, they have very limited resources, very limited abilities, and over the course of playing the game, they will make certain achievements where they will unlock new content, they'll unlock new abilities, they'll unlock new resources. So in a game that's maybe a game where you're in control of a civilization like Sid Meier's or Sid Meier's Civilization or Age of Empires, you start with a couple villagers who build a farm, and then once they get enough wheat, they can go and chop down some trees and build barracks, and from the barracks they can recruit some soldiers, and then they can build bigger barracks to get more troops. In a game like Skyrim, you start out with just your fists, and then you can get a sword, and then if you go win a couple missions, if you get a couple bounties, you can get better armor, you can unlock new abilities. And in any game, there has to be some sort of sense of direction and achievement for the player, where you go and do this, and you get rewarded with the ability to basically play more of the game. You unlock new abilities, get new resources, that sort of thing.
So when we recommend to people who are working with us to design and develop games, I always suggest to work backwards from where they want the players to be, either at the end of a finite or defined tree of, let's say, advancement properties. Let's say if it is a linear storyline game, obviously there's a beginning and an end. They're going to get to here. This is one of the tracks that they can take. These are the resources that they can go along the way. But for games that are unlimited in story, then that becomes more about playing down certain avenues. So you can develop or work all the resources or gain all the armor items for this faction or for this playthrough, in the sub part of the game. So how does that connect to the player aspect? Because a lot of times players, they don't know where they're going. How do you keep it interesting for the players to keep advancing?
Yeah, it's definitely true that you can think about the end state and then work back. It's a little bit like writing a mystery, a whodunit, where you have to figure out how the crime is done before you can figure out how the detective solves a crime, so you know where all the clues are. But also when you're coming up with the stages of your game, or you're coming up with the plot of the game, the actual storyline, you're gonna be telling the player, oh, go here, go here, go here.
Right.
But what you want to make sure is that it's not just a laundry list of things the player has to do. You put that player advancement, you put the unlockable items and achievements at each stage of the game, so that the player does something, he gets a reward. The player does something, he gets a reward. And that also helps because what sort of advancement the player makes can be related to where he is in the game. If you're playing a first-person shooter, you might get access to a vehicle at the point of the game where your player now has to make a trip that's a little bit outside of walking distance.
Sure. So it can connect to the story, too.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, because...
Or the stages of the game, early game, middle game, late game. Which we have a video on.
Exactly. You check out that one as well.
But in a game that's more like Age of Empires, where you're fighting a battle or running a civilization, building a port can give you access to ships. So once you get to a certain part of the game, you'll get enough resources or unlock the ability to build a port, to build ships, so now you can go to a new island and expand. So in the early part of the game, you have the ability to develop your island. Later on in the game, once you've developed that island, now you get the ability to go and expand outside. So those are things to take into consideration.
I really like this idea, though, and I think a lot of game designers and developers can do a better job of thinking about the resource management of the ecosystem, in the sense of, like you mentioned, not giving a vehicle or allowing a player to buy a vehicle in just an open marketplace until that's necessary in a linear storyline game can be hugely impacted to that overall feel. Like, wow, we got to a certain point, we needed this item, now we get to use it. And that can become part of that collective playthrough for a lot of players. Conversely, when you have a marketplace-based game, and there might be all of these available resources and options for a player, well, we have to also balance the fact that maybe you don't want to have, let's say your game is a time-based game where some part of the game you start, let's say, in the ancient world and then you're in the future. Well, you might not want an open marketplace where just because you have a lot of gold coins, because you, let's say, develop something early on, you can go buy something that doesn't fit historically. So there's a balance of, like in Civ, where, you know, Civilization 5, Sid Meier's, they kind of have a tree for you to go through.
In Crusader Kings 2, your technology tree, if you're not at a certain year on the calendar, technologies are more expensive. So it's actually impossible or very, very difficult to get anachronistic technologies.
Right. Yes.
But also in a lot of games that are story-based, a particular moment, usually a very emotional moment or linchpin part of the story, will be associated with getting certain technology in the
or a rare item.
Yeah, in the Arkham games, Batman will get a certain piece of equipment at a certain point in the story that makes it very memorable.
That can be used from that point on for other aspects or missions.
People will remember the moment when Batman gets the Batsuit in Arkham City,
right? Because
it's a part of the story.
Yes,
that it happens at a specific time in the plot.
Sure.
And so it's a big moment of, that's when you get this, and people will remember that. So that's really...
and collectively, then that's where you can start to build community around the players that are playing through your game. And if you have these milestones built in, then there might be a group of players that, you know, collectively can be in your Discord or your Reddit, and they can all coalesce around that idea.
Yeah, it's like a movie. People will remember that moment from your game,
right?
Because it's not just a mechanic in your game; it's part of the storyline. And you definitely always want to make sure that the player experience, the story of the game, the actual mechanics of the game are all interwoven into a.
And I think this makes sense, like we've said, in terms of some of the other videos we made on storylining. I think we have a video on lore and kind of developing your environment, that you have to do a lot of this planning up front before you even go into like mechanical development or choosing what system you're going to be on. It's like writing a set of novels.
Yeah,
you have to kind of know where you want the players to be.
Plan out the game before you start to make it.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for tuning in. This has been Game Brainz. I'm John.
And I'm Michael.
Be sure to rate, subscribe, and share our videos. Until next time.